The morning mist in the Great Smoky Mountains always moved like breath, slow alive and unpredictable. Ranger Nathan Cole knew its rhythm better than most. He'd spent nearly 12 years patrolling these ridgelines, guiding lost hikers and keeping the peace between wildlife and the people who wandered too close to it. He believed that if you listened long enough, the forest would tell you everything you needed to know. But that morning, the forest was too quiet. Nathan parked his Jeep near the overlook, the tires crunching over gravel damp from last night's rain. The Smokies stretched out beneath him, a living ocean of green. To visitors, it looked peaceful. To Nathan, it was a network of unseen stories, tracks in the mud, claw marks on bark, quiet signs of lives colliding. He'd learned to read them the way others read books. That was what his father had taught him. Don't look for what's there, son. Look for what's missing. His father had been a ranger, too stern, gentle, patient in his way. They used to hike these same trails when Nathan was a boy, stopping to watch black bears graze in distant clearings. They're not like the cartoons, his father would say. They're quiet neighbors. They keep to themselves unless you give them a reason not to. Nathan carried those words through every patrol, every encounter. Yet as he grew older, he realized that the lesson wasn't just about bears, it was about people too. Everyone was just trying to find space to live in peace. By now, late May had brought the usual trickle of hikers into the Park City, families eager to spot wild animals for the first time. Most never saw more than a squirrel or two. The black bears stayed deep in the forest this time of year, guiding their cubs through safety lessons, where to find berries, when to climb trees, how to stay invisible. But that season, reports started drifting in small black bear tracks near campsites, claw marks on dumpsters, overturned coolers. Nothing unusual for the Smokies until the call came that morning. The radio on Nathan's dash crackled with static before a voice cut through Cole. "We've got something strange near Klingman's trail. Multiple hikers say a cub's been following them for over a mile. No sign of a sow." Nathan frowned. "Following them?" "Affirmative," the dispatcher said. "Won't back off. Seems tame almost." The word hit him wrong. Wild black bears weren't tame. Cubs avoided humans instinctively unless something was wrong, separated hungry or worse. He started the engine, the low rumble blending with the rustle of wind through the trees. As he drove, the forest began to change. The deeper roads wound through thick pines and rhododendron tunnels that caught the light like stained glass. He passed the usual trailheads, the signs warning visitors to store food properly. A couple of deer lifted their heads from the roadside grass as his Jeep rolled by. To most people, these details were scenic. To Nathan, they were signals, a living system that only felt peaceful because it worked so hard to stay balanced. He thought about something Dr. Emily Hartman, the park's wildlife biologist, once told him during a field survey. "We call them wild animals," she'd said, "but they're just better at living with uncertainty than we are." He'd laughed then, thinking she meant it philosophically. Now, as clouds gathered over the peaks, her words felt literal. In the wild, uncertainty wasn't a problem, it was the rule. A few miles down, the forest narrowed into one of the park's lesser-used roads. The last group of hikers he'd seen earlier had already passed through. He checked his mirror and saw nothing but mist chasing him. Somewhere ahead, a cub was breaking all its instincts, walking toward the one creature it should have feared. He slowed the Jeep, scanning the roadside. Tracks appeared near a puddle, small round impressions spaced unevenly, the kind of prints made by a young black bear still learning coordination. He killed the engine, stepped out and crouched near them. The soil was soft, damp. The edges of the prints still held water, meaning they were fresh. Within an hour, maybe less. Nathan adjusted his ranger hat and followed the trail for a few yards, his boots sinking into moss. He saw where the cub had turned around, circled back, then walked toward the road again. That kind of pattern told a story: confusion, searching, waiting. He could almost hear his father's voice again. Look for what's missing. In this case, what was missing was the mother. He'd handled bear incidents before: a mother and two cubs near a campground, another time a male bear crossing the highway at dusk. They were predictable in their unpredictability, wild but logical. A cub alone, however, broke every rule. Either something had happened to the mother, or she'd been scared away by humans. Neither scenario sat right with him. He returned to the jeep, grabbed his binoculars, and scanned the tree line. Nothing but mist and the gentle sway of leaves. Then he heard a soft rustling near the ridge. He froze, eyes attuned. The sound came again, closer this time. Slow, hesitant steps. When the shape emerged from the fog, it was smaller than he expected, barely reaching his knees. The black bear cub stopped on the edge of the road, wet fur clinging to its small frame. For a few seconds, neither moved. Nathan didn't reach for his tranquilizer gun or flashlight. He just watched. The cub's chest rose and fell rapidly, its sides trembling. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't afraid. It was waiting. Something about that gaze held him still. He knew that young bears sometimes followed scents, food-familiar trails, or even people who smelled like campfire smoke. But this cub's behavior was deliberate. It stood there, dripping rainwater eyes fixed on him like it recognized him. Nathan knelt slowly, lowering his height. "Hey, little one," he murmured, a voice barely above the whisper of wind. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" The cub tilted its head. For a moment, Nathan thought it might run. Instead, it took a single step forward, then another. The ranger in him said to back away, to let nature correct itself. The man in him, the one who still remembered following his father through the woods as a boy, stayed still. Something about this moment felt different, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch. I've got eyes on the cub. No sign of the sow. Behaviors unusual. Standing near the road, approaching vehicles." "Copy that," came the reply. "You want backup?" He hesitated. "Not yet." He lowered the radio. The cub had stopped just a few feet away, its paws pressed into the mud. Then it did something Nathan would never forget. It turned to look toward the forest and let out a low, muffled sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a cry, more like a plea. Nathan's pulse quickened. He took a slow breath. "You want me to follow, huh?" The cub didn't move. It simply looked back once more and padded into the trees. He stood there for a long moment, rain seeping through his jacket. The logical part of him screamed against following. But logic didn't feel like it belonged here. Instinct did. As he stepped toward the tree line, a memory returned his father's last patrol before retirement. They'd found a fawn trapped in a drainage ditch. Nathan had been eager to pull it out immediately, but his father had stopped him. "Don't rush," he'd said. "Every creature has its rhythm. You help best when you move with it, not against it." That rhythm was what he felt now, a heartbeat shared between ranger and cub, human and wild. He walked until the forest swallowed the road behind him. The sounds of civilization engines, radios, human chatter faded away. In their place came the soft percussion of fan on leaves, the rustle of unseen wings, the heartbeat of the Smokies. Somewhere ahead, the cub was leading him into something he didn't yet understand. As he moved deeper into the woods, he radioed again. "Emily, it's Nathan. I might need your eyes out here. Something's off. Meet me near the old service trail." Her voice came through calm and curious. "Copy that. What's going on?" He hesitated, watching the faint trail vanish between the trees. "I think a bear cub just asked me for help." The line went silent for a second before Emily replied softly, "Then maybe it's time we listened." Nathan smiled despite the chill. He adjusted his hat and followed the small prints winding through the forest. Behind him, the road disappeared into mist. Ahead lay something deeper than duty, something the forest wanted him to find. He didn't know it yet, but that single decision to follow would change everything he thought he understood about fear, instinct, and trust. And somewhere between the thunder and the rustle of leaves, the mountain seemed to whisper back his father's old words. "The forest always speaks, son, if you listen." The cub's faint cry echoed again from beyond the ridge. Nathan tightened his coat, wiped the rain from his face, and stepped forward. The forest waited. The forest was waking slowly after the storm. Drips fell from the canopy like tiny clocks, each one marking Nathan's careful steps. The bear cub's small paw prints led deeper into the Great Smoky Mountains, vanishing at times under fallen leaves, only to reappear beside the roots of poplars. He kept a respectful distance, aware that black bears, no matter how small, could still be unpredictable. But what struck him most wasn't fear. It was how deliberate the cub seemed. No panic, no randomness. Every pause and glance backward looked like a signal. Clover, he whispered to himself. He didn't know why the name came to him, but it fit small, fragile, somehow lucky. Maybe it was the way the cub's dark fur caught the scattered sunlight like a clover leaf glistening after rain. Nathan followed until the trees thinned into a clearing shaped by last winter's windfall. He could finally see Clover clearly. The cub's fur was soaked, clumped together in places, and there was a faint limp in its back leg. Yet it moved with quiet determination, occasionally turning to make sure Nathan was still behind. He stopped a few yards away, crouching low. His voice was steady, calm. "It's all right, little one. I'm here now." Clover froze ears, twitching. For a moment, Nathan expected the cub to bolt. Instead, it shuffled forward and sniffed the ground between them. The space felt sacred, two lives separated by species, but connected by the same simple drive to survive. Wildlife training told him not to engage. The rule was always the same. Keep distance, observe, document. But this wasn't a case study. It was something alive, pulsing with silent urgency. He noticed a thin streak of mud on the cub's leg. Not just mud-dried blood. That limp wasn't minor. He leaned slightly forward, studying the movement. "You're hurt," he said softly. "No wonder you came looking." Clover's head tilted at the sound of his voice. The cub let out a low huff, not aggressive, more like frustration. Nathan recognized it. Black bears often made that sound when trying to communicate discomfort. It reminded him of something Dr. Emily Hartman once said, "Animals don't talk, Nathan. But they still say everything if you stop listening like a human." That line had sounded poetic back then. Now it felt practical. Nathan unhooked his field bag and carefully pulled out a small pouch containing antiseptic spray standard for injured wildlife encounters. He didn't intend to treat the cub alone. It was too risky. But he could assess from afar. He crouched, his movements slow, deliberate. "I just want to look. You're okay." The cub tensed, ready to retreat, but instead of running, it took a step sideways and looked back toward the forest again. Its gaze lingered there long enough for Nathan to understand something else was waiting deeper in the woods. He rose to his feet, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except for the breeze pushing through fern and fog. "You're not lost," he murmured. "You're leading me." The thought unsettled him in ways training manuals never covered. Wild black bears avoided humans unless cornered. For a cub to approach willingly to lead him somewhere, it meant desperation or trust. Maybe both. He tapped his radio. "Emily." "It's Nathan. I've found the cub, limping on one leg, no sow nearby." Emily's voice came back clear, but laced with concern. "Copy that. Are you sure it's alone?" "Pretty sure. Behavior's off. It's leading me somewhere. You're saying it's guiding you. I don't know what else to call it." "Stay put," she said. "I'm on my way. Don't push too close." Nathan lowered the radio and smiled faintly. Too late for that, Doc. He followed as Clover moved again, cutting between birches toward a small stream. The cub stopped at the bank, bent down, and began pawing at the water, pulling small branches aside. Nathan stepped closer. The water ran clear and cold, rushing over the stones, polished smooth by time. It wasn't what the cub was doing that struck him. It was the way it kept glancing back, waiting. He crouched beside the stream, noticing faint impressions near the water's edge. Boot prints human, adult size, fresh. They led across the stream and vanished into the other side. His mind began connecting pieces, the cub, the tracks, the limp, the urgency. "Someone's been here," he said quietly. "Maybe the reason you're out here alone." Clover gave another soft huff, almost like agreement. A twig snapped behind him. Nathan spun instinctively, reaching for his tranquilizer gun, but it was Emily emerging from the mist with her usual calm. Her long braid was damp, her jacket streaked with mud. She carried her old brass compass in one hand and a field kit in the other. "Found your trail," she said, catching her breath. "You weren't kidding, this one's bold." Clover stood halfway between them, torn between caution and curiosity. Emily crouched slowly, her movements practiced and patient. "Hey, little one," she said in a voice Nathan had heard her use with injured animals. "You've had a rough day, haven't you?" The cub blinked, watching her. Then it did something unexpected. It limped closer to her instead of away. Emily glanced at Nathan, her expression softening. "That's trust. They never do that, unless they've already made up their mind about you." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the cub. "It's been leading me since the road. I think it wants help, or it's protecting something Emily countered." She followed the cub's gaze toward the opposite side of the stream. "Let's find out which." They crossed carefully, water soaking through Nathan's boots. The cub followed closely, stopping every few feet to check behind. Its limp grew more pronounced. Emily noticed it too. "Back leg," she said quietly. "Probably strained or scraped. Not broken. We'll take care of that later." Nathan motioned to the boot prints. "There's someone else involved. Human. Could be a hiker," she said. "We've had a few off-trail this week, but why would a bear cub lead us there?" The air grew heavier, the kind of stillness that makes every breath sound too loud. Somewhere distant thunder rolled. Nathan remembered his father's advice about instincts. Sometimes the map isn't drawn on paper. It's drawn in the silence between two heartbeats. He watched as Clover pushed forward again, crossing logs, weaving between trees. Each movement seemed purposeful, guided by something unseen. "Emily," he said quietly, "I don't think this cub is lost. I think it's on a mission." She gave him a skeptical look, but didn't argue. "Then let's see where it goes." For nearly half an hour, they followed through terrain that grew increasingly wild. Thick ferns, roots like ropes, faint trails that no tourist ever walked. The rain started again, soft but persistent. Emily checked her compass occasionally, then looked up at Nathan. "You realize this is the kind of story no one believes unless there's proof." Nathan chuckled. "You'll get your proof, Doc. Just keep that camera ready." At one point, Clover stopped beside a fallen log and sniffed intensely. Nathan noticed a torn strip of fabric caught on a branch, a piece of nylon likely from a backpack. It was wet but unmistakably human-made. He felt a quiet chill crawl up his spine. Someone's been here and recently. Emily took the fabric, studying it under the dim light. Could belong to that missing hiker we heard about last week, the one who never checked out. Nathan nodded. The puzzle was forming fast now, but the missing piece was still somewhere ahead, whatever Clover wanted them to find. They pressed on until the slope steepened sharply. Nathan's boots slid on wet soil as he caught a branch for balance. "You okay?" Emily called. "Fine," he said, though his heart pounded harder than he expected. "You think we're close?" Emily was about to answer when Clover stopped abruptly. The cub turned toward them and gave a sound halfway between a grunt and a whimper. Then it walked ahead a few more paces, stopped again, and repeated the sound. Nathan's breath caught. It wasn't random. The cub was guiding them deliberately, waiting for acknowledgement before moving forward. He met Emily's eyes. "I think it's calling us," she nodded slowly, voice low. "Then we'd better listen." As they continued, Nathan felt a growing mix of awe and unease. This wasn't supposed to happen. Wild animals didn't ask for help, didn't bridge that invisible line between fear and faith. Yet here was a baby black bear leading two humans through the wilderness as though it understood exactly what it needed them to see. Somewhere deep inside, Nathan felt that old lesson from his father stir again, the one about balance. The wild didn't owe humans anything, but sometimes it trusted them anyway. He looked at Clover limping through the underbrush and thought of how fragile trust was, how rare. Maybe that was the quiet truth of the Smoky Mountains. The wild wasn't a place to conquer or fear. It was a mirror. It showed you who you were when no one else was watching. Emily paused to adjust her pack. If this cub really is leading us somewhere, it's not random. There's an intention behind it. Black bears aren't known for rescue behavior, but they're intelligent problem solvers. This one may act out of learned association. Maybe it's seen people help before. Nathan smiled. Or maybe it just knows we're listening. Her reply came with a half grin. You always were the dreamer between us. Someone's gotta be. They continued until the path narrowed again, hemmed by mossy boulders. Nathan noticed the cub's pace quicken despite its limp. Its small form disappeared behind a rock outcropping, and when they caught up, it was sitting at the edge of a dark ravine. Nathan's flashlight beam cut across the space, illuminating twisted branches and what looked like the entrance to a den beneath a fallen tree. Clover gave another soft cry and pawed at the ground near the opening. Nathan knelt beside it, heart heavy with realization. Whatever's in there, he said quietly. That's what it's been trying to show us. Emily crouched next to him, setting her compass on a rock. Let's find out. Nathan reached for his radio again, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. Dispatch, we may have found something important. Send backup to our coordinates. He looked at Clover, who sat quietly now, watching him with an expression he couldn't explain. Gratitude, hope. Maybe something older than both. He felt it again. The invisible line between human and wild crossed it not by force, but by faith. And as thunder rumbled once more through the Great Smoky Mountains, Nathan realized this was no accident. This cub hadn't found him by chance. It had come to ask for help. The forest swallowed sound the deeper they went. Every step felt amplified, the crunch of Nathan's boots, the occasional slip of gravel, the faint rustle of Clover's paws ahead. The cub never looked back for long, just enough to make sure the humans still followed. Nathan and Emily moved in silence, both aware that they were far beyond any tourist trail now. The air smelled different here, older, untouched. Nathan checked his watch. The afternoon was sliding toward dusk. The light dimmed faster in the Smokies, where the ridgelines closed over you like a giant hand. We'll lose daylight in less than an hour, he murmured. Emily nodded, tightening her jacket. Then we trust the compass and the cub. She patted the brass compass hanging from her belt, its face worn smooth initials etched faintly on the back. My dad gave me this after my first field season, she said. He told me not to use it just for directions. Nathan smiled. What else would you use it for? She shrugged lightly. Finding myself again when the forest gets too quiet? There was a pause between them, gentle, heavy. Nathan knew what she meant. Silence could either center you or unmake you, depending on what you carried inside. Clover kept leading them uphill, weaving through pines and wet brush. The cub's limp slowed it down, but not by much. Every few yards it stopped, sniffed the air, and made that low half-whimper sound again. Still calling, Emily whispered. Nathan nodded, or warning. They climbed for another 20 minutes before the first roll of thunder echoed. The storm that had hovered all afternoon was closing in. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that hinted at lightning. Nathan looked around, calculating. If it breaks over us, we'll need cover fast. Closest ridge is another half-mile, Emily said, checking her compass. We'll make it if we keep pace. Clover didn't seem worried. The cub moved ahead, pausing only when the thunder cracked close enough to make the ground tremble. Nathan's instinct said to stop to wait it out. But something about the cub's urgency made standing still impossible. As they crossed a narrow ridge, the rain began sharp, cold, relentless. Visibility dropped within seconds. Nathan reached for Emily's arm as they stumbled through the mud. Stay close, he shouted. Clover's dark shape flickered between trees like a shadow. Every few seconds it looked back, eyes catching what little light was left. Nathan pushed forward, trusting those small glints to guide him. Then it happened, the kind of slip every ranger dreads. Nathan's foot hit a slick patch of moss, and he went down hard, sliding several feet before catching himself on a root. The impact knocked the breath out of him. His flashlight tumbled away, rolling down the slope. Nathan Emily called, skidding toward him. "I'm okay," he managed, though his ribs ached. He stayed still for a moment, listening to the rain hammering the leaves above. It was in moments like these that he always thought of his father. The old ranger had once told him, "You can't fight the mountain, son. You move with it, or it moves through you." He breathed deeply, letting the pain settle, then climbed back up with Emily's help. "Remind me to stop chasing wild animals through lightning storms," he said, forcing a grin. "Deal," she replied, half laughing despite the tension. When they finally reached level ground, again the cub was waiting. Its fur was plastered to its body, eyes alert. Nathan knelt slowly, holding out his hand, in what had become an unspoken ritual between them. Clover hesitated, then stepped forward, placing its paw on a patch of moss near his boot. That small gesture, so hesitant, so deliberate, felt like trust renewed. "All right, little one," Nathan said softly. "Lead the way." They moved again, slower now. Emily recorded short clips on her body camera, narrating quietly between breaths. Unusual black bear cub behavior. Repeated visual contact with humans. Guiding movement, confirmed. Nathan smiled. "You documenting or writing poetry?" "Both," she said. "Sometimes science needs a little heart." He glanced at her. "Guess that makes us a decent team then." Lightning flashed again, close enough to paint the forest in silver. They took cover under an overhang, waiting for the worst of it to pass. The storm's energy seemed to pulse through the ground itself. Nathan looked at the cub huddled beside them and marveled at how calm it seemed. "I used to think bears were simple," he said quietly. "Eat, sleep, survive. But this one," Emily finished for him, "feels like it's thinking." He nodded. "Or feeling something we don't have a word for." She studied Clover thoughtfully. Black bears are smarter than most people give them credit for. They remember food sources for years. Some even recognize human voices they've heard before. But what gets me isn't the intelligence, it's the decision. This cub chose to stay near you instead of hiding. That means it made a judgment call. Nathan thought about that. Then maybe the lesson here isn't about the cub at all. Maybe it's about learning to listen differently. Emily gave him a sideways look. "You sure you're not the poet? Must have caught it from you." When the thunder faded to a distant rumble, they pushed on. The forest felt renewed, washed clean by rain. Streams that had been trickles earlier now ran fast and noisy. Clover led them along one such stream, its path winding between slick rocks. Nathan's flashlight beam caught flashes of movement, ahead a small animal darting a flicker of wings. The night creatures were waking. They followed until the cub stopped, suddenly raising its nose to the wind. Nathan sensed the change immediately. The air smelled heavier, like damp fur and decay. Emily noticed too. "Something's close," she said. Clover's ears flattened. It took a few tentative steps forward, then looked back at them again, eyes wide. Nathan realized it wasn't fear, it was urgency. "Whatever it's showing us," he said, "we're almost there." They climbed a low embankment, and on the other side the ground leveled out into a clearing ringed with boulders. The cub darted ahead, limping but determined. When they caught up, Nathan saw the entrance to a narrow hollow beneath a fallen tree. It looked deep, dark, and almost hidden. "This must be the den," Emily said. She crouched, shining her light inside, but careful not to intrude too far. If the sow's in there, she might be hurt. Clover whined softly and pawed at the entrance. Nathan crouched beside it, his flashlight catching the faint shape of something large inside. He couldn't see clearly, but the outline was unmistakable. A bear, motionless. Emily lowered her voice. "She's not moving." Nathan's chest tightened. "You think she's gone?" "Can't tell. We'll need to get closer, but carefully. If she's alive and wakes up, she'll defend." He nodded. "Then we follow protocol. I'll cover you." As Emily prepared a tranquilizer dart, Nathan kept his flashlight steady. The air inside the hollow smelled of wet fur and earth. The cub pressed close to his leg, trembling. Nathan looked down at it and whispered, "It's all right, Clover. We've got her. Emily crawled halfway in steady hands despite the tension. She aimed, fired the dart, and waited. Moments stretched like hours. Then came the faintest twitch, a shallow breath, barely visible, but there. "She's alive," Emily whispered. Relief softened her features. Weak, but breathing. Nathan exhaled slowly, feeling something uncoil inside him. Clover made a soft sound, half whine, half sigh, then leaned closer to the hollow. Emily backed out carefully. "We'll stabilize her here, then call in the team to transport. Could be internal injury collision, maybe. We'll find out." Nathan nodded, still watching the cub. "You did good," he said quietly. "You brought us right to her." Clover blinked, almost as if understanding. For a long time they stayed there, rain whispering through the leaves above the cub, pressed against its mother's side while Emily made quick notes. Nathan radioed for the rescue crew, his voice low, steady. As the night deepened, he found himself thinking about what this encounter meant not just for them, but for how people saw the wild. The world often painted animals as instinct machines, driven only by hunger or fear. But this cub had acted on something deeper: connection, courage, maybe even hope. He remembered his father saying once, "The line between us and them isn't as thick as we pretend." Nathan looked at Clover and saw their truth reflected. Emily began packing her gear, the relief visible on her face. "She'll make it if we move fast. You want to ride with the transport?" He shook his head. "You go. I'll follow in the truck once the storm clears. I just need a minute." She understood without asking. "Don't stay too long. The forest gets cold quickly." When she left to meet the rescue team, Nathan sat near the hollow, the cub beside him. The quiet was heavy but peaceful. Every so often, the mother bear's breathing grew steadier, her chest rising and falling like a slow drum beat. Nathan reached into his jacket, pulled out his father's old pocket knife, and turned it in his hand. The handle was carved with a bear, the family crest of sorts. His father had carried it for 30 years on these same trails. He whispered to the air, "Guess you were right, Dad. The forest always tells you what you need to hear." Clover rested its head against the ground, eyes half closed. Nathan smiled. "You've got more heart than most people I know." Lightning flashed once more across the ridgeline, illuminating the scene, the ranger, the cub, the forest breathing around them. For a moment, it all felt timeless. And then, as the rain softened to a mist, Clover stirred and nudged his boot gently, as if to say thank you. Nathan rose, his jacket dripping, his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't quite name. Compassion, maybe. Gratitude. Or that rare kind of peace that comes only when you've done something that mattered. He looked once more at the dark woods ahead and whispered, "All right, little one. Let's get her home." The forest had quieted, but the quiet wasn't peace. It was the kind that holds its breath before something changes. The storm was far from over. Nathan could feel it in the air, a low hum in his chest, like static before a lightning strike. He glanced at Clover, the baby black bear, still pressed close to the hollow where its mother lay. Emily had gone to meet the rescue team, but the minutes stretched and the forest darkened faster than he liked. He knelt beside the cub. "They'll be here soon," he whispered. "Just hold on." Clover's eyes shifted from the hollow to the trees, uneasy. Nathan followed the gaze and saw the branches shiver, though no wind moved yet. He felt the pull of instinct, a ranger's awareness that something bigger than himself was rolling in. He radioed Emily. "Storm's circling back. You'd better move quick." Her voice crackled through static. "Copy that. We're about 10 minutes out. You stay put." He smiled to himself. When have I ever listened? Then the thunder broke, a deep rolling sound that made the ground tremble beneath him. Clover startled, letting out a high-pitched cry that pierced the hum of rain starting to fall again. Nathan crouched lower. "Easy, little one. It's just the sky talking." He remembered his father saying something similar years ago when a summer storm had rolled through the Smokies during one of their night patrols. "The sky talks louder in the mountains," his father had said. "Doesn't mean it's angry, just means it wants to be heard." Nathan had laughed then. Now the memory steadied him. He adjusted his flashlight and scanned the path ahead. The rain came harder, erasing tracks within seconds. If the rescue crew didn't get here soon, the terrain would turn treacherous. The den would flood fast. He couldn't let that happen. He radioed again. "Emily, water's rising near the hollow. If you don't make it in time, I'll have to move them uphill." "Negative," she replied, voice clipped. "You're not equipped to carry a full-grown sow through mud in a thunderstorm." "Don't have a choice," he said. "If that den fills, she's gone." There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, "You always did like testing the odds." He grinned despite himself. "Somebody has to." He set the radio down and moved quickly. First, he checked the sow, still breathing, faint but steady. He could see now that the injury came from deep scratches near her flank, likely from sliding against a rock or vehicle impact. It wasn't fatal if they could keep her dry. He adjusted her position, sliding his jacket beneath her head. The cub watched, trembling but calmer now that Nathan's voice filled the space. "You're all right," he murmured. "We're going to make sure she gets to safety." The rain thickened, each drop heavy as pebbles. Lightning flashed close enough to paint the forest in momentary daylight. Nathan shielded his eyes and worked faster, using branches to create a barrier near the hollow's opening. His hands were numb, his uniform soaked through, but the rhythm of work kept fear away. Then, in a sudden crash, a nearby tree split under lightning. The sound ripped through the air like a cannon. Clover bolted from the hollow, darting toward the slope. "Clover," Nathan shouted, lunging after it. Lunging. His boots slid in the mud, the beam of his flashlight cutting wild arcs through the rain. He caught sight of the cub near a boulder, trembling under a bush. Kneeling, he reached out slowly. "It's okay. I've got you." The cub hesitated, then pressed against his arm, seeking warmth. He lifted it gently, feeling the tiny heartbeat pounding fast. "Brave little thing," he said. "Braver than most men I know." As he carried the cub back toward the hollow, a faint light glimmered through the tree's headlamps. Relief flooded him. "About time," he muttered. Emily emerged first, soaked but steady. "You picked a fine spot for a rescue," she called. "Tell me you brought help." 2 other rangers appeared behind her with a stretcher and medical packs. Emily crouched beside the mother bear, immediately checking vitals. "Still breathing. Pulse irregular. We'll stabilize her and move fast." Nathan nodded. "Storm shifting. We've got maybe 20 minutes before this whole ridge turns into a stream." Clover refused to leave his side as they worked, even when the rangers began securing the sow onto the stretcher. The cub whimpered, pacing near Nathan's legs. Emily looked up, rain streaking her face. "That's not normal behavior," she said softly. "She won't let us separate them." Nathan crouched beside the cub. "Then we don't." "Not yet." He stayed close, one hand on the cub's back, until the team lifted the mother onto the stretcher. Together they began the climb uphill toward higher ground. The slope was slick mud, giving way under each step. Thunder rolled so close it felt physical. Halfway up, one of the rangers lost footing, the stretcher tipping dangerously. Nathan lunged, grabbing the handle before it slipped. For a moment, the weight pulled at his arms like an anchor. He gritted his teeth and heaved upward until balance returned. The others steadied the load. "Keep moving," Emily called. "We can't stop now." Every muscle in Nathan's body burned. The cub trotted just ahead, glancing back as if urging them forward. The sight pushed him through the exhaustion. Step by step they climbed until the ridge finally leveled into a narrow clearing beneath an overhang. "Here," Nathan said, breathing hard. "Set her down here." They worked quickly, laying the sow on a tarp and covering her with thermal blankets. Emily checked her again, then looked up with quiet relief. "She's stabilizing. We got her in time." Nathan crouched, resting a hand on his knee. "Good. She deserves a chance." Clover curled beside its mother head, resting against her side. The sight tugged at something deep in Nathan's chest. Family instinct, love, whatever name you gave it, the meaning was the same. Emily sank beside him, rain still dripping from her braid. "You ever think about how much they trust us, even when they shouldn't?" He nodded slowly. "More than we trust each other sometimes." The storm raged around them, but the overhang held. For a few minutes, they simply sat in silence, listening to the rhythm of rain on rock. Nathan found himself tracing circles in the mud with one finger the way he used to when his father talked about patience. You know, Emily said every ranger has one story that changes how they see the job, something that reminds them why they do it. He smiled faintly. Guess this is mine. What's it telling you? He looked at Clover, small and exhausted but unyielding. That maybe our job isn't just to protect nature. Maybe it's to learn from it. Emily tilted her head. Learn? What? That help doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it's a cub limping through the rain teaching you how to care again. Her expression softened. You should write that down. He chuckled. I'm better at walking it than writing it. Lightning flashed again, farther now, the worst of the storm drifting north. Emily stood stretching. We'll wait until it passes, then head to the station. Nathan nodded, watching the cub breathe slowly beside its mother. He thought of all the rescue calls he'd answered over the years, lost hikers, injured animals. Small miracles hidden between long days of quiet. None had felt like this. There was a calm that came after chaos, a stillness that demanded reflection. The Smoky Mountains had given him that more than once, but this time it felt personal. He looked up toward the dark ridge. The clouds were breaking at the edges, thin ribbons of silver moonlight pushing through. For the first time all day, he felt warmth despite the rain. Hey, Emily, he said softly. When this is over, I want to take the long route back. The one my dad used to patrol, she smiled. You always did like making things harder. He laughed quietly. He said the long way teaches you more. About what? About gratitude? Nathan said simply. Emily nodded. Then I'll walk it with you. The radio crackled, breaking the stillness. Bass to Cole. How's our patient? Nathan lifted the mic. Stable and heading to rehab once the storm clears. Cubs are safe too. Copy that. Good work out there. He set the radio down and looked back at the cub. Clover stirred, opening its eyes briefly before nuzzling closer to its mother. Nathan smiled. Rest now, little one. You've done your part. Emily began packing her gear again, efficient but gentle. You think she'll remember this? The cub, he asked. Yeah. He considered it. Maybe not the details, but I think she'll remember the feeling, the way safety feels when someone shows up. Maybe that's enough, Emily said. Nathan stood stretching stiff legs. The rain had softened to a whisper. The forest, once loud with thunder, now pulsed with quiet life again, frogs calling water, trickling down stone branches, creaking softly. He looked at the small family resting beneath the overhang and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure gratitude for being exactly where he was. As the clouds finally began to break, a faint light touched the forest floor. It wasn't full dawn yet, but it was a promise of it. Nathan turned to Emily. When they're ready, we'll walk them out. Together. She nodded. Together. The storm passed, but its lesson stayed the wild. Never asked for help without reason, and sometimes the ones who answered found themselves rescued too. The night after the storm carried a kind of silence Nathan had only heard once before, the kind that follows after something fragile has been saved. The rescue team had moved the injured mother Black Bear to the park's field center, and Clover was resting nearby in a transport crate lined with leaves. Nathan sat on the tailgate of his truck, watching the cub through the slats. Its small form shifted occasionally, tiny paws twitching in dreams. Emily approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee, her flashlight beam slicing briefly through the dark. You should try sleeping, she said, handing him a cup. Can't, he admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see her lying in that hollow, like she was waiting for us. Emily leaned against the truck beside him. She probably was. Cubs don't lead humans by accident. He nodded quiet for a long moment. Do you think they'll both make it? She's strong, Emily said. Internal bruising, but no fractures. They'll keep her under observation. As for Clover, she smiled faintly, that one's pure spirit. A few days and you won't be able to keep her contained. Nathan chuckled softly. Wouldn't surprise me. The two of them sat listening to the hum of generators and the distant call of night birds. Around them, the Great Smoky Mountains exhaled steam from the soaked earth. It smelled of pine and rain and renewal. Emily turned her compass over in her hands, tracing its edges. "You know what gets me every time," she said. "We build maps, run GPS track with drones, but the forest still hides things right under our noses. That den, it's been there longer than either of us, and no one knew." "Maybe it wasn't meant to be found," Nathan said. "Until tonight," she replied. He thought about that. Some places didn't reveal themselves unless there was a reason. The hidden den wasn't just a shelter. It was a story waiting to be told, one that started long before he arrived. Later that morning, when the rain finally gave way to fog, Nathan walked back to the site with a small team to mark the den for research. He wanted to see it again in daylight to understand what Clover had been trying to show him. The climb was easier this time. The forest was still wet, but the sun filtered through in soft patches. When they reached the hollow beneath the fallen tree, Nathan paused. It looked different now. Smaller, somehow, ordinary. The kind of place most people would walk past without a second thought. But he couldn't. He crouched beside the entrance and ran his fingers through the damp soil. "You'd never know what happened here," one of the younger rangers said behind him. "That's the thing about the wild," Nathan said. "It doesn't leave markers for our sake." He examined the area, noting faint scratches on the bark, signs of old movement, maybe years of use. "This den's been here a long time," he said. "Generations of bears could have sheltered here." Emily, who had joined him again, nodded thoughtfully. "A place like this is sacred to them. It's where life starts and sometimes where it ends." Nathan felt that truth settle in his chest. Life and loss were always neighbors in the forest. He'd seen it in every rescue, every recovery. But what struck him this time wasn't tragedy, it was intention. A baby black bear had led them to this place, to a moment that could have easily gone unseen. He stood brushing mud from his gloves. "You ever think about why she chose us?" Emily looked up. "You mean Clover?" "Yeah. Out of all the people in this park, she walked toward the road. Toward me." Emily smiled. "Maybe she saw something familiar." "Like what?" "Maybe the way you hesitated before raising your weapon. Animals notice hesitation. It's how they read intent." Nathan frowned slightly, remembering that first moment on the highway. "You think she knew?" "I think she hoped," Emily said simply. They worked quietly for a while, marking coordinates and taking soil samples. At one point, Nathan noticed a glint near the edge of the den, a small metal tag half buried in dirt. He dug it out carefully. It was stamped with faint letters, "Smoky Park Wildlife Study, 2009. Emily leaned closer. "That's one of our old tracking markers. Must have belonged to a bear from the early study years ago, maybe even one of Clover's ancestors." Nathan turned it over in his palm, the metal cool and worn smooth. "So this den's been part of their story all along." "Exactly," Emily said. "We just stepped into it at the right time." That idea stayed with him. People always thought the forest was random, a tangle of chance and chaos. But the longer he worked as a ranger, the more he saw patterns, cycles, decisions. The wild wasn't disorder. It was a rhythm too vast for humans to hear all at once. Before they left, Nathan took one last look inside the den. The hollow floor was still damp, but small sprigs of clover had already started growing where the soil had been disturbed. He smiled at the coincidence. "Clover," he whispered, realizing how fitting the name truly was. That evening, back at the center, the cub was awake and alert. Nathan knelt beside the crate, and Clover tilted her head, recognizing him. She let out a small rumbling sound, not a growl, more like a greeting. He chuckled softly. "You've got good timing. You know that Emily joined him, clipboard in hand." "She's eating again. That's a good sign." Nathan nodded. "She wants out." "Soon," Emily said. "But not yet. We'll keep her here until her mother can stand on her own." Nathan rested a hand against the crate. "You led us right where we needed to go," he said quietly. You saved her." Emily's voice softened. "You realize how rare this is, right? A cub acting with that kind of intent, it's almost unheard of." He nodded. "I know. But maybe that's the lesson here." "Which is?" she asked. "That nature doesn't need us to believe in miracles for them to happen." Emily smiled. "You sound like my dad again." Nathan laughed lightly. "Guess I'm catching your optimism." That night he stayed longer than he planned. The park was quiet, except for the steady hum of rain gutters and the occasional hoot of an owl. He found himself thinking about his own father again, how many nights he'd probably sat in this same kind of silence, reflecting on lives saved or lost. He wondered what his father would have said about Clover. Maybe he would have called it luck, maybe instinct. But Nathan liked to think he would have understood the deeper truth. Sometimes the wild trusted you back. A few days later, the sow regained strength enough to stand. Emily arranged for both bears to be moved deeper into the protected zone where human contact was minimal. Nathan volunteered to drive the transport truck. Clover sat quietly in her carrier during the ride, occasionally pressing her nose to the bars when he spoke. He kept his tone gentle, telling her about the forest waiting for her return, the rivers, the hollow, the familiar smell of home. When the truck finally stopped, Emily opened the gate and stepped aside. "Your turn," she said. Nathan lifted the latch and stepped back. Clover hesitated for only a moment before bounding out, limping slightly but strong. She paused halfway to the trees and looked back once, just long enough for him to catch her gaze. Then she disappeared into the green, swallowed by the forest she'd never really left. For a long moment, Nathan and Emily stood there, neither speaking. "She's where she belongs," Emily finally said. "Yeah," Nathan replied softly. "Maybe we all are." They lingered until the sound of movement faded completely, replaced by the steady rhythm of the forest breathing again. Nathan felt a quiet peace he hadn't felt in years, the kind that doesn't ask for understanding, only acceptance. As they turned back toward the truck, he looked once more toward the ridge. The hidden den was somewhere beyond it, unseen but eternal, sheltering the stories of those who had come before. Some places you find by accident, he thought. Others find you. By dawn, the storm had become a memory mist, clinging to the valley's soft light rising through the Great Smoky Mountains. Nathan stood outside the wildlife center, watching the fog lift from the treetops. He had been awake most of the night waiting for updates on the mother black bear and her cub Clover. When Dr. Emily Hartman stepped out of the treatment bay, her eyes carried both exhaustion and relief. "She made it," she said simply. Nathan exhaled tension, leaving his shoulders. "You're sure?" Emily nodded, wiping her hands on her jacket. "Hydration therapy worked. The internal swelling's gone down. She'll need a few more days under monitoring, but she's going to be fine." Nathan smiled faintly. "Guess Clover knew exactly who to find." "That cub did more than most people would have managed," Emily said. "She didn't just survive, she brought us straight to a rescue." Nathan followed her inside. The center smelled of antiseptic and damp fur, the kind of mix only a wildlife clinic could have. Behind reinforced glass, the mother bear rested under gentle heat lamps, her breathing deep and even. Clover slept beside her crate, one paw reaching through the bars as if to make sure the connection stayed. Nathan watched quietly. "You ever think they understand what's happening to them?" Emily tilted her head. "Not the way we do. But they feel intention, fear and comfort, danger and kindness. They read it faster than words." He nodded slowly. "Then she knows she's safe." "Exactly." They stood there for a while, the kind of silence that felt like gratitude more than quiet. Outside, morning light touched the windows, filling the room with a pale gold that made everything look softer. Nathan glanced at the cub again. "You think she'll remember this?" Emily smiled. "Maybe not the details, but she'll remember trust. That's how wild animals survive, by remembering where safety lives." Her words lingered. Nathan thought of all the rescues he'd worked, how so many ended with survival, but not all with meaning. This one was different. It wasn't just about saving a bear. It was about being reminded why he still believed in what he did. Later that morning, he joined the team preparing the sow for relocation back to the protected zone. The truck was loaded with portable cages, medical supplies, and tracking gear. Each step of the process was calm, efficient, rehearsed, but Nathan could feel something different in the air, a quiet reverence. Emily handed him the sedation log. "You'll drive again. Wouldn't miss it." As the engine started, Clover stirred in her crate, her small body pressing against the bars. Nathan kept his voice low. "Don't worry, we're going home." The road wound upward through the Smoky Mountains, twisting between ridges still slick with rain. The air smelled like pine and clean earth. Every few minutes, Nathan glanced in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see the cub's dark eyes watching him, and every time he did. Halfway up the ridge, Emily broke the quiet. "You ever notice how rescues say more about people than the animals?" Nathan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Most folks assume wild animals can't help themselves, but they can. They adapt, they find ways to survive. It's people who forget how to do that sometimes. Rescues remind us we're still part of something bigger, something worth protecting." Nathan smiled, his gaze on the winding road. "You sound like your dad again." She laughed softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." The climb grew steeper, but Nathan didn't rush. The truck moved at the forest's pace, steady, patient, deliberate. Somewhere ahead, the same trees that had sheltered Clover's den waited. When they finally arrived, the transport team worked quickly. The mother bear was awake enough to move on her own, groggy but strong. They opened the crate door, giving her space. She hesitated only a moment before stepping out, her heavy paws sinking into the wet soil. She sniffed the air, recognizing the scent of her home range. Clover was next. Emily unlatched the smaller crate, stepping back as the cub bolted free. It stumbled, then regained its footing, eyes scanning the forest until they found her, the mother standing a few yards away. The moment stretched two shapes motionless, reading each other across the space between. Then the cub moved fast as breath closing the distance. The sow lowered her head, letting out a low rumble that was neither warning nor alarm. It was recognition. Clover pressed against her side, small body trembling with relief. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the real rescue." Emily smiled beside him. Nature doesn't need applause, just witnesses. They stayed for a long time, watching mother and cub disappear slowly into the underbrush. The forest swallowed them the way it always did, quietly, without ceremony. The only evidence they'd been there was two sets of fresh tracks side by side leading into the trees. When the last rustle faded, Nathan turned to Emily. "You think anyone will believe this story?" "Probably not," she said. "And that's fine. The truth doesn't always need an audience." He nodded, then glanced once more toward the trees. "Still, I kind of hope Clover remembers us." Emily chuckled. "Oh, she will. Maybe one day she'll be the reason someone else gets found." They packed up the gear and began the drive back. The forest felt lighter now, as if it too had exhaled. Nathan watched sunlight flicker through branches, his thoughts tracing the strange path that had led them here, from a routine patrol to a miracle that shouldn't have happened, but did. At a bend in the road, he stopped the truck to take one last look at the ridge. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think the wild was indifferent, that it didn't care whether we were here or not." "And now?" Emily asked. He smiled faintly. "Now I think it's patient. It waits for us to remember we belong." For a few miles, they didn't speak. The hum of the truck and the rhythm of gravel beneath the tires filled the space between them. Nathan thought of all the people who'd driven this road before him, unaware of the stories unfolding just beyond sight, the lives saved, the quiet acts of courage, the unseen grace that lived in the forest's heart. As they reached the ranger station, clouds began to gather again, small and pale, but harmless this time. Emily stretched, glancing back toward the cages now empty in the truck bed. "You realize this will make the reports sound unbelievable." "Let them sound that way," Nathan said. "Some things aren't meant to fit inside paperwork." She grinned. "So, what do we put under cause of discovery?" He thought for a moment. "How about guided by instinct?" Emily laughed. Perfect. When she walked off to file the report, Nathan stayed by the truck a little longer. The air was cool, touched by the faint smell of wet soil. He felt a quiet weight lift from his chest, the kind that comes when a circle closes. He thought of Clover somewhere out there under the canopy, safe beside her mother. And he thought of his own father, who used to say that every rescue, no matter how small, was a thread stitched into something larger than a single life. Maybe this was his thread, an act of trust between man and animal, wild and human, both answering the same call to care. Nathan looked toward the ridgeline one last time before heading inside. He knew the forest would go on telling stories long after his part ended. But this single, improbable rescue had changed something in him. He no longer saw the wild as a place apart. It was family. The week after the rescue felt different in Pine Ridge Station. The air in the Great Smoky Mountains had turned warmer, clearer, washed clean by days of heavy rain. Nathan Cole started his mornings the same as always. Coffee reports, patrol briefings, but everything around him seemed sharper, alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. Maybe it wasn't the forest that had changed. Maybe it was him. Everywhere he went, someone wanted to talk about the miracle cub. Word had spread fast. Local hikers, volunteers, even a few news outlets called asking for details. Nathan kept his answers simple. A black bear cub had led him and Dr. Emily Hartman to its injured mother. Nothing more, nothing less. The rest of the story, the part that still lived quietly in his chest, didn't need headlines. One morning, as he was organizing field logs, Emily walked into the office with a stack of photos. "You've got to see these," she said, laying them out across the table. Each image showed the mother bear and Clover in their new release zone, healthy alert, framed by thick green foliage. Nathan smiled. "They look good." "They are," Emily said, pride in her voice. "Our trackers spotted them near the stream yesterday. Clover's bigger already, and her limp's gone." Nathan studied the last photo, a shot of the cub perched on a fallen log, gazing straight into the camera. "Still fearless," he murmured. "That's her nature," Emily said. "Curious, brave, a little reckless. Sound like anyone you know." He laughed softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." They sat for a while, going through the photos. Each one told a piece of a story that felt too beautiful to fully belong to them. Then Emily pulled one last image from the envelope. It showed the old den, the hollow beneath the fallen tree, where everything had begun. A few sprigs of clover were growing there now, bright and alive. Nathan's throat tightened. "You went back?" "Had to," she said. "That place means something now. Not just to them, to us." He nodded. "I used to think rescues were about control, about fixing what went wrong. But this one..." He paused, searching for the right words. It wasn't about control. It was about listening. Emily leaned back in her chair. "You finally sound like a biologist." "Don't ruin it," he said, grinning. Their laughter softened into quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Outside the station, the forest hummed crickets, birds, the distant rush of water. Life had returned to its rhythm. That afternoon, a group of school children visited the ranger post for an educational program. Nathan watched them from the doorway as they listened wide-eyed to one of the guides explaining how to stay safe around black bears. "They're not monsters," the guide said. "They're neighbors. Respect their space and they'll respect yours." A small girl raised her hand. "Is it true a baby bear saved somebody?" The guide smiled. "That's what the rangers say. Sometimes even wild animals know when someone needs help." Nathan stepped outside, catching the girl's gaze for a moment. She smiled shyly before returning to the group. He felt something stir inside him, a reminder that stories didn't just belong to the people who lived them. They belonged to everyone willing to listen. Later, he walked the perimeter trail alone, the same one he'd driven during the first call. The road was quiet now, but he still remembered the sight of Clover standing in the headlights, rain pouring down, defiant and determined. That image had become a kind of compass in his mind, a symbol of courage that didn't roar but simply refused to give up. He paused near the spot where he had first stepped out of his patrol truck. The trees had new buds. The ground was dotted with early summer clover. It almost felt as if the forest itself had kept the memory. Emily found him there a few minutes later, her boots crunching softly on gravel. "You still thinking about her?" "Always," he said. "I keep expecting to see her around the next bend." "Maybe you will." He smiled. "Maybe." They walked together for a while, the sun filtering through branches overhead. "You know, Emily said there's something we don't talk about enough, the cost of rescue." Nathan looked at her, curious. "How do you mean? Most people think saving an animal ends with release. But it doesn't. Every rescue reminds us how much we've changed their world road's noise waste. It's a constant balance between helping and not interfering too much. We forget the wild isn't broken. It's adapting." He nodded slowly. "So the real challenge isn't saving them. It's learning to live in a way that doesn't make saving them necessary." "Exactly." Her words sank deep. It was the truth at the heart of his job, the unspoken lesson that every ranger learned over time. Humans weren't guardians looking down on nature, they were participants. And sometimes the wild did the saving. As they reached the ridge overlook, the view opened wide miles of rolling forest, stretching toward the horizon, still glistening from the last rain. Nathan took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs. It carried the faint scent of pine and something older like memory itself. Emily broke the silence first. "You know, I was thinking of adding this case to my upcoming talk at the wildlife conference." He laughed lightly. "Oh great, now we're famous." "Not famous," she said. "Useful. People need stories like this, not just facts and warnings. They need reminders that compassion isn't a weakness in conservation. It's the starting point." Nathan considered that. "Yeah. It's the one thing science and the wild actually agree on. Nothing survives without connection." "Now you sound like the poet again," she teased. He grinned. "Guess Clover's been teaching me." The sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. They stood together in quiet reflection, watching the light fade. Nathan spoke softly. "You think she'll ever come back here?" Emily smiled. "Maybe not to this spot, but someday when her cubs are grown, she'll show them where it all began. That's how they remember, through patterns, through paths." He nodded, eyes tracing the tree line. "Then that's enough for me." Back at the station that evening, Nathan wrote a brief note in the logbook. "Black Bear, Sioux, and Cub Stable. Released to the home range. Observation continues. Unusual cub-led rescue event. Suggests learned trust behavior." He paused, pen hovering above the page, then added one more line. "Some rescues begin when we stop trying to lead and start learning to follow." He closed the book, feeling the quiet satisfaction that came from finishing a story without forcing an ending. As night settled, the forest outside pulsed with life again. Nathan stood by the window, the hum of crickets and wind filling the space around him. He could almost imagine Clover out there somewhere older, stronger, her small paw prints long erased by rain, but her spirit still moving through the trees. For the first time in years, he felt like part of that rhythm. Not separate from the wild, but woven into it. Emily's voice came from behind him, gentle. "You ready to head home?" "In a minute," he said. "I want to stay until the lights fade." She smiled. "You always were the one who stayed." When she left, he remained by the window, watching darkness rise over the mountains. The last light flickered across the distant ridge right where he had first met the cub. Nathan whispered, "Thank you, little one," though he knew no one was there to hear it. Still, somewhere beyond the trees, a single sound echoed faintly, a rustle, soft and deliberate, like the forest answering back. And for a brief moment, he let himself believe it was Clover, alive and free, reminding him that some connections don't fade, they just find quieter ways to last. A year passed before Nathan saw her again. Not clearly, not long enough for proof, but enough to know. It was late autumn in the Great Smoky Mountains, the kind of crisp day when the light bends soft through the trees and the air smells faintly of pine and memory. Nathan was finishing a solo patrol, a quiet stretch along the ridge near the same forest road where it had all begun. The calls on his radio were routine, lost hikers trail maintenance. Nothing unusual. He parked his Jeep where the gravel gave way to soil and walked the rest of the way. It was something he did often now, less for duty, more for peace. The forest had become a kind of teacher. It had taught him that silence wasn't empty, that patience was its own language. He found that every time he stepped into it, his pulse slowed, his thoughts cleared. Maybe that was why he kept returning to remember what mattered most. He reached the overlook just as the sun began to dip. The light painted everything gold, the ridges, the distant streams, even the rough bark of the trees. For a moment, everything stood still. Then he heard it, a faint rustle, low and deliberate. He turned a hand, instinctively brushing the radio at his side. Out between the pines, two shapes emerged, a full-grown black bear and a smaller one trailing close behind. The mother's size was unmistakable, but what stopped him cold was the way the cub moved. Its stride had a faint unevenness, almost invisible except to someone who had seen it before. The same small limp. Clover. He didn't move, didn't speak. The bears were too far to sense danger, far enough to remain shadows more than bodies. Yet somehow Nathan felt the moment connect them. The mother paused, lifted her head and looked toward him. It wasn't recognition, not in the way people think, but something quieter, a kind of awareness. Then she turned and both disappeared into the deeper woods. Nathan stood there long after they'd gone, heart heavy with something that wasn't sadness or joy, but both at once. Some things didn't need words or witnesses. They just needed to be felt. He smiled, whispering under his breath, "Welcome home." Later at the ranger station, he told Emily what he'd seen. She smiled without surprise. "You always said she'd come back." "She's wild," he said softly. "She was never gone." Emily nodded. "Still, it's nice to know she's out there. Proof that what we do matters." They sat for a while in the dim light of the office, finishing paperwork neither of them cared much about. Outside, the night carried the familiar sounds of the Smokies' owls calling crickets, weaving their endless songs. Life is going on. Nathan thought about how easily things could have turned out differently. How often in his career has he seen the line between loss and survival balanced on a moment's choice? What had saved the bears wasn't luck. It was instinct meeting compassion halfway. A cub who trusted her fear. A ranger who chose to follow it. That thought stayed with him. He'd learned that survival wasn't just about strength or speed. Sometimes it was about courage in the smallest form, the kind that moves toward a help instead of away from it. The wild, he realized, wasn't separate from human life. It mirrored it. Black bears protect their young the way people protect their own families. They grieve, adapt, and teach. The distance between them and us wasn't a canyon. It was a footstep. Weeks later, a new mural appeared on the side of the general store in town. It showed a black bear and her cub beneath the mountain skyline, painted by a local artist who'd heard the story. People stopped to take pictures, leaving apples and honey jars near the forest edge. Nathan drove by one evening and saw children pointing at the mural, eyes wide with wonder. One of them said, "That's the bear that found the ranger." He smiled. The story had taken on a life of its own, shaped by retelling, softened by awe, made timeless by hope. When the forest finally slipped into winter, Nathan returned one last time to the old trail near the den. The fallen tree was still there, softened now by moss and snow. The small patch of clover had withered for the season, but he knew it would bloom again come spring. That was the way of things here. Nothing truly ended, it only changed form. He crouched near the hollow, brushing his hand over the earth. "You did good," he whispered. "You changed more than you'll ever know." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and cold air. Somewhere distant, a branch cracked soft, deliberate. Maybe it was just the forest settling, or maybe it was something else. He didn't need to know. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to be trusted. On his walk back to the Jeep, Nathan found himself thinking about the lesson Clover had left behind. It wasn't about heroism or instinct alone. It was about connection. About how the simplest act of following your gut could bridge entire worlds. He remembered something Emily had said once: compassion doesn't take away from nature's strength, it completes it. That became the truth he carried into every new call, every patrol, every story he told to visitors who asked about the bears. He wanted them to understand that what happened wasn't a fairy tale, it was real, grounded in trust and survival. Wild animals didn't owe humans gratitude, yet sometimes when the moment was right, nature let its guard down just long enough for us to see what respect really looked like. Over time, Nathan noticed the way people around Pine Ridge changed too. Hikers started storing food more carefully. Families reported bear sightings without panic. The forest had a new kind of reverence woven through it. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. That was the legacy Clover left behind, one cub's silent lesson echoing through an entire community. For Nathan, the story became a quiet compass. When days grew long or bureaucracy dulled his sense of purpose, he'd think of that cub leading him through rain and darkness, unafraid of the unknown. He'd remember that trust, even across species, begins with courage on both sides. Sometimes during his late patrols, he'd stop at the ridge overlook and wait. He never saw Clover again, not clearly. But once on a spring morning, thick with fog, he spotted two cubs playing near the tree line, rolling, tumbling, full of life. A larger bear watched nearby, head raised, steady and calm. Nathan stayed still, a silent witness. He didn't need confirmation. The story had already come full circle. He stood there until they disappeared into the mist, his heart full. It wasn't just about one rescue anymore. It was about what it revealed: that the wild wasn't some distant, unknowable place. It was part of the same story we all belonged to. We just forget to listen. As he climbed back into his truck, he looked once more at the forest. "Thank you," he said quietly. It wasn't to the bears or the mountain, it was to whatever force had brought them together that day. Call it chance, call it instinct, call it grace. It didn't matter. It was real. Driving down the mountain, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the road ahead. Nathan smiled, thinking about how life worked in patterns, the kind that repeat until we finally understand them. For every storm, there's a calm waiting to return. For every lost trail, a guide appears when we least expect it. And for every small act of courage, the world shifts just enough to remind us that hope is alive and wild as ever. So maybe that's what this story was always about. Not a ranger or a cub or even a rescue, but a reminder that we're never as separate from nature as we think. The forest speaks. The question is whether we're listening. If you've made it this far, maybe it's because something in you believes that too. Maybe part of you still recognizes that same quiet call to protect, to care, to notice. And if you do, then let this be your moment to pause and look around. Ask yourself what wild really means to you and what you're willing to protect in it. Because every story, like Clover's, begins the same way, with someone who chooses to stop, listen, and follow. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that compassion and courage still exist in small, real moments, then help keep that spirit alive. Hit the like button, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories from the wild, stories that remind us not just of the animals we save, but of the humanity we find along the way.